Morning, everybody. How are you doing? What a great view. So if you get distracted by my boring slides, just look at the Westminster Abbey, isn't it? That's what it is. God, I live in Spain, you see. That's why I sound like Tony Banderas, as I say. Well, welcome. It's great to see so many friends, old and new. And I'm not talking about your age, John, really, but this is our company. I'm based in Madrid. We work in consulting and recruitment. Most of the mega brands, UN agencies we work with, but also national organisations here and many other countries. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. Let's just look at where we came from post that C word. We won't mention the C word too often. What was happening just before then is many of our fundraising tools were really on the growth. You know, I'm just back from the first ever international face-to-face fundraising conference in Vienna, where my team and I, when I was at Greenpeace, co-invented face-to-face fundraising as we know it. All going up, even in China, in India, everywhere. Digital. Middle donors, people weren't doing that much. Direct mail in most countries going down. UK tends to be, you know, a little bit still hanging on to direct mail for older generation donors. Keeps people like John in business, I think. But in other countries, in Spain, you know, if you say direct mail, people don't even know what it means. I mean, you just don't use it apart from thanking your donors, sending out tax receipts with a link to download the tax receipt. Click, click. Anybody? Whoa, needs a new battery, probably. Oh, I've jumped a lot, haven't I? Slow. Here we go. Other things that were growing and actually changing during COVID, and we'll talk about that a little bit, was foundations income going up. Having been quite static for a while. In Europe, we have Oak Foundation. Anybody know of Oak Foundation? Get money from you? Massive foundation, very progressive. And in the US, foundations like Rockefeller Brothers, others, really boosting into their, I mean, specifically right now, billions of dollars, pre-COVID and post-COVID, into climate change issues. I mean, they are forming and funding so many climate change issues, they are now struggling to get the leadership up to standard in many of those organizations. Major donors. Anybody received some money from Canada? Certain woman who inherited some 50 billion and is giving it away at a heck of a rate. Big donors were going up. And again, donor advised funds. You speak in China, you speak to non-profits in the sector in China. Donor advised funds, straight out of the USA, put into the Chinese market because young entrepreneurs in those countries didn't want to form these big foundations. They wanted to find young, smart people like them who wanted to make change together. Great time. Corporate donations still continues. And we have the CEO and we have the chair of the AFP USA sitting on the front row here, who presented many of these data, or this data was presented recently in New Orleans. And then came COVID and it changed everything. Or did it? I often wonder. There was a panic moment. And then guess what? In most countries we work in, COVID generated the highest growth in income in years. Fundraising tools except face-to-face. But digital, telephone, legacies and legacy impact, I think, is still rolling through many markets from COVID. And we learned new ways of working, or many organizations did. And that presented challenges, it presented opportunities. It was interesting listening to the opening plenary speaker where she's talking about you take every opportunity that faces you, and they're not all good, but you can turn that difficult experience into a positive experience and learn from it. And I think we came out in many ways far stronger as a sector in fundraising. This afternoon, I'll be discussing with other colleagues whether we as individuals came out stronger, because I think mental health is an issue that we'll touch on a little bit later. I wrote quite a lot during this time about pivoting and pirouetting. As I mentioned in the beginning, quite a lot of our clients are the big international organizations. Anybody here from UNICEF, UNHCR? At a national level, they can move very quickly because they're independent. The big upper echelons of UN agencies or the big development non-profits, etc., are hard to make decisions fast. They're not used to making decisions in a big crisis and switching how they spend their money and how they raise their money. And what really surprised me is just how effective COVID forced them to do that. On the other hand, other organizations froze. This quote I love from Franklin D. Roosevelt, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We also saw many organizations where the board did the duck and dive. You know, oh, we can't possibly go and ask our donors for money. Oh, God, no, they're suffering. They're in a crisis. Their lives are in turmoil. Why ask them for money? Well, my team in the telephone call center in Spain and the face-to-face have raised about $2 billion in the Spanish market alone. We make thousands of calls. There's 400 people a day just calling non-profits. The highest return on investment and high levels of retention, high average gift during COVID. Why? Because people actually said, thank you for calling. How many of you get that in a normal environment? Thank you for calling. It's nice to talk to someone different. We had a challenge. People wanted to have not a 3 or 4 or 5 minute conversation, but an 8-minute conversation. They wanted to share more of themselves, and it was really a conversation. And what happened then is the big organizations started switching, as you probably did in this room, a lot of money going from face-to-face, which is still by far the biggest area of investment in the world, to telephone, digital, and DRTV. Suddenly, there was this issue about, oh my gosh, we need money now for our operational funds and unrestricted money. Well, interestingly, that helped them switch that, because you could change the narrative, stay solid to your mission, and be raising money for your core income. Costs went down. Interestingly, many international organizations now ban people from traveling to international events, such as the IFC or others, AFP, here if you're coming from elsewhere, if you have to use an aeroplane. So organizations changed policies around climate change and to save money. But also, this money that was not being spent in other areas of fundraising, like face-to-face, was suddenly being invested also in innovation, because you had to get creative then. Anybody here had a worse year during COVID than the year before COVID, for example? Anybody, hands up? Not one, and this is a pretty full room. Did you have a good year the year after, immediately after COVID? Hands up, who didn't? Which organisation was that? Charter 77. Oh, Charity for Civil Servants. Okay, yeah, that could have been challenging, I imagine. No disrespect. Nowadays, 3 or 2 years later, whatever we're at, yeah, there are some challenges seeping through, and ROIs are getting difficult. But I think that's also based on some of the other external challenges. Cost of living. It affects many of us. Interestingly, during COVID, mergers and acquisitions. Anybody here from a merged charity? No? Which one?
Ripple effect.
Sorry? Ripple effect. What does that do? International family. Famine. Development organisation. Thank you. It started to be a trend. I used to work at the Terence Higgins Trust here in the UK. It became very much the sort of dominant partner in the field. But what happened to all those places like London Lighthouses, hospices, when Freddie died, Queen wanted to put all that money into hospices. And I had to sit and argue with them and say, no, people aren't dying with AIDS. Freddie was one of the last in the UK, not the first. HIV/AIDS charities very quickly after the antiretroviral drugs had to merge because there were too many in too many locations, too little infrastructure. That is happening all over the world right now. Cancer Research UK and Imperial Cancer Research, was it called in the past? Or those two, when they merged, one of the biggest mergers. But this, in the crisis, people were saying, okay, what can we do? How can we share resources, share infrastructure? Italy, particularly, this was a trend. So these are what's going on. Like I say, clients grew 20%. These areas started to grow. At last, legacy marketing. And again, those organizations say we can't talk about death because people have COVID. Absolutely, utterly, and totally wrong. It's precisely the time people wanted to have telephone conversations and understand about leaving, writing a will, leaving a legacy, making sure their papers were all in order because they didn't know what was going to affect them. And again, I go back way to the 90s. The Terence Higgins Trust did massive legacy fundraising, fully funded, authorized. The board kept saying, put more money in it. We had a board of 13 and 12 of them died within the 3 years I was there. They were acutely aware of the impact of death and how they had to get their things in order, because in those days, even a gay man or a gay woman co-owning a property, if they died with AIDS, it went to the parents and their partner was homeless. The laws hadn't changed. Getting your systems in order when things like a health crisis happen had a huge impact. And we're seeing, especially in Spain even now, a massive increase in legacy income, which is becoming through from the times in COVID. And flipping events to virtual online, anybody had to move their like sponsored walk, sponsored run, marathon, trail finder, whatever, online during that period? Yeah, which one was that? Midnight Walk. Oh yeah, how did that go? Was that UNHCR? No, IRC. How did it go? It was all right, was it? Yeah. Some organisations, the really mega ones that do it, the American Cancer Association, raises hundreds of millions from its virtual events, its Walk for Lives and things like that. They put a lot of it digitally online. They got $90 million plus from their online event. People, again, wanted to do something. They wanted purpose. They wanted reason. Our clients, the Fred Hollows Foundation in Australia, they had a walk they used to do around Sydney, and it would raise $500,000. It was a big publicity thing. They went online and it raised 5 million Australian dollars. So it actually made them rethink what they were actually doing. So I didn't put it on my profile. It doesn't say in many places, except in Spain. They insist it goes on my credit cards. Anybody want to guess what my middle name is? Baden. Why is it Baden? What does that say? Baden Powell. I inherited the name Baden from my grandfather, Stanley Baden Upsall. But Baden Powell was the founder of the Girl Scouts and Girl Guides, Cubs and all of those. I was a Sea Scout, and I genuinely, it's a bit like going back to the plenary there. I genuinely believe that the whole concept of be prepared, is a concept that we as fundraisers and we as non-profits have not really embraced very well. Maybe we haven't had time. We say, oh my gosh, we're in an economic crisis at whenever. And I remember being in an economic crisis, I think in 85, in 90-something, in 2007. Yeah, we've been in fundraising economic crisis. They're cyclical. And we haven't learned about being prepared. The British government was prepared for a flu epidemic, it seems. And still they were unprepared for COVID, it seems, allegedly. So what are the key findings we've got? That's probably going to go to, is don't hide from the problem. What many, many leadership of organizations did is they kind of hid from COVID. They thought, we'll get through, we don't have to. We're tracking organizations who performed in those that acted fast, switched the money quickly, moved to new ideas, even moved money between markets in a very different way. If your market had a huge budget for face-to-face, and yet, I don't know, another country had limited fundraising budget, they could absorb it in telephone, perhaps you couldn't. Stick to your mission. There's a lot of evidence to say that organizations that suddenly became COVID-ish organizations didn't do well. Anybody want to guess which sector appears to have done best during the COVID period? It was actually animal welfare in most countries. And then you sort of scroll back and you go, yeah, that cat, that dog in most countries allowed you to go for a walk. In Spain, only people with dogs could go out for a walk. We didn't have any rights of exercise on both lockdowns. But the cat kept people company. Have your systems ready. How many of you were fully prepared for lockdown before lockdown happened? Anybody put their hand up? Okay, the civil servants. You probably had some advance warning. Okay, I get it. Yes. But I was surprised. You know, I have a call centre, but I'm not the CEO of it. My sister-in-law runs that. And she literally flipped 400 callers from Friday online in the office to Monday. So in the office, headphones, all of that, headsets, to Monday. They were all working at home. And I said, how the heck did you do that? He said, well, it's easy. We had everything in the cloud. We had all the systems in place. They all had a headset. Most people have a laptop. And it literally did not lose one day's calling. The harder problem was getting some of the non-profits to allow us to continue to call because they were panicking. Again, some of the big ones not. Be flexible, trial and test. There was a lot of testing going on. There was a lot of trialing. And I say trialing because were they really alpha, beta testing? There wasn't much time for that. But people were trying stuff. And some worked and some failed. So there you go. The other thing that really, really made a difference, and I'm sure you all did, is those core donors, those that we've talked about a lot, those I would say that the UK fundraising market has pioneered, if not first, you know, the Dutch were really good at direct debits or the equivalent back in the 80s and the early 90s. But the UK has been really heavy on the mantra of monthly giving through the bank, through the direct debit or standing order originally. And those people stuck. There was not a high cancellation rate. And in case any of you experienced it, I didn't see those there. That was a big wake-up call, I think, for the US, because a monthly donor or a committed donor or I'm forgetting the phrase, it'll come to me in a minute. They're done by check, still in many cases. So it's 12 checks. Now, if you're busy, or even if you're not busy, it's easy to forget to write a check. It's much easier to forget about a direct debit. And it's much easier when you have a direct debit to call people and say, you know, these are tough times. I know it's tough for you, but still our mission goes on. There are still refugees. There are still people homeless. Would you be interested in increasing your monthly gift? If you've got all the data and it's one click of a button, monthly average values could go up very easily. And of course, most of us weren't spending excessive amounts of money on food, in my case, and travel and theatre and all those other things. So actually there was disposable income. So far from it being a challenge for many of us, it was an opportunity. Keep telling people the impact. Keep telling people what you're doing and ramp up your social digital because, again, we had more time. And as you saw, visitations on those media went through. So enough of that. Any thoughts, questions, disagreements? Howard, you've probably seen more data than most of us. Thoughts? Sorry, I picked you out, but you don't have to.
I'll just say, was there anything that stopped and hasn't picked up again? And I don't have an answer.
You know what? I thought face-to-face would have seriously crashed still. I mean, like it's still in recovery mode, but we were in a conference in Vienna just a month ago, totally sold out conference, totally sold out before COVID, then we cancelled. We did 3 digital versions, which had 1,000 plus attendees around the world. 70 countries attended the in-person a month ago. And some of the organisations are still showing exceptional growth. Anybody from UNICEF? I don't think so, no? Yeah? Oh, you said, of course you don't. How's your face-to-face going?
We don't do face-to-face
In the UK anymore? But globally, they were presenting their data. It was stunning. I think it's every 4 minutes of every day UNICEF recruits a monthly donor, and it's still going up. Because the other thing is, like in the UK, where things may have stopped and the market's very full, the ROIs, the retention rates are tough. You go to Thailand, you go to Sri Lanka, you go to Indonesia, those markets are still showing growth. Japan, whatever. Question there, and then a question there.
Is there anything else that you've changed in your face-to-face strategy then being post-COVID?
Very good question. Throughout that whole period of COVID, there were 15 of us on this planning committee for the conference that was meant to take place in Vienna and eventually did. And those 15 were essentially the heads of face-to-face for the biggest non-profits in the world, Save the Children, IRC, WWF, etc., and some of the bigger agencies. And a lot was learned in that process. For example, the back office got way more digitalized, way more automatized, if you like. QR codes, as with everything, came into their play. But also, you had to change the conversation. It's one thing to be talking close when you were making conversations from a distance. So people were coming up with like funky things. This is our floor mat. I love the Save the Children one. It was red. And it kind of said, this is 1 meter, this is 2 meters. But inside the floor mat, there were nice messages about their mission and their work. And how, thank you, your support. So I think there was a lot learned in communication, a lot learned in the marketing. And what was really come out is it gave people a long time to improve their training materials, their due diligence on EDI and things like that. The biggest challenge actually post-COVID for those labor-intensive fundraising tools, telephone and face, is everywhere in the world we can't hire people. The biggest single challenge, number one, can't find the staff. It doesn't matter where you are. It's a bit like restaurants, well, the UK has a reason why you can't find restaurant staff, agricultural staff, but that's another story. Nurses, oops. Don't get me on that one. So, what's more happening now? Oh, sorry, there was one other question, lady there.
Oh, it might be something you'll go on to, but I guess my question was around, you talked about like the lessons we can learn pivoting and pirouetting through COVID. Like, do you have a sense of what we should be doing for the cost of living crisis? And like, A, what we can be pivoting and pirouetting through now, and what perhaps in 2 years' time, if we are on the up from this, and if we are out of this, like when we look back, what's the next tour going to be in 2 years' time? Like what are the trends we can learn from COVID that can help us potentially with this situation?
That's a very good question, and this is a presentation I could change. I do once every 10 years, like for a year, and then kill it. The main thing I'd say in the cost of living crisis, because it's really about people's capacity to give, is actually to call people, much more on the thank you, much more on the support care, but also in conversations is offer downgrading. Opportunity, if you're on £15 a month, say, and they go, well, it's really difficult, I'd like to cancel. And you go, well, what if we dropped and you'd start with £2 down and then maybe £5. And if they're really stuck, you just say, what about a donation holiday? What about we give it 6 months, no donations? We'll keep you informed of our mission, the work we're doing. You've contributed so much. Thank you, thank you. And then literally have it into your CRM to say, in 6 months' time, you'll call. And it will refer back to the call. Really appreciate you taking that time. We hope that things have got better for you. Blum. But I'd say the biggest thing we need to really learn is focus on the donor, listen to the donor, and provide donors with the opportunity to do what they can do within their own means. I think what we probably didn't do so well is see how we could engage the wealthier segments of the community. And by that I mean not mega donors giving millions, but people who can afford to give 10,000, 20,000, whatever, and ask for their support. Because as we all know from the statistics, they were the ones who were accumulating quite significant, in COVID times, significant wealth. And again, you look at most charts in the world, the rich aren't getting poorer, generally speaking. The rich are getting richer. The poor are just getting poorer. And we haven't really had that conversation very much. You all probably know about the CAF report, do you? Everybody know the CAF giving report? It's not about donations, it's about volunteering, it's global. And I always have a funny feeling when I come into this building, because the last person who gave a plenary speech for fundraisers was Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in this building for the Charities Aid Foundation. That shows how long it's taken fundraisers to come back. I don't know what that says. But these are the questions that get asked in the CAF World Giving Index. I forget which time of year it comes, probably around now actually, it's going to come out soon. It asks these questions. It's a lot of people. Interestingly, again, as you saw that during COVID and post-COVID, volunteerism was going up. I think actually in the UK there's probably a bit of a backward slide on volunteerism, if I recall the latest reports, isn't it? Which maybe they're having to look after themselves more, or family and close. You know, you've got to bear in mind, in many cultures, volunteerism and fundraising is helping your extended family. High income levels go out. Indonesia, I mentioned it earlier, interesting as the most generous country in the world when you put all of those things together. Is that for religious reasons? Whatever. But you might be quite surprised who comes there. Yeah, USA is still up there, but New Zealand, Australia down there. And of course, strangely, coming in there, Ukraine, because I work a lot with Ukraine nowadays, and yeah, Ukrainians are giving to support themselves and Ukrainians outside of the country. Dive into too much of that. But again, the helping the stranger going up. But most of the indices show going up during this recent period. That's 2022. Probably the data's 221, end of. Donating money and ranking. You know, UK's right up there, number 5. The USA, I think, in terms of percentage, surprisingly data that. I think I presented this at AFP and people were surprised. Because in sheer volume, what is it, 423 billion, I think, more or less, last year, given in the US? That's a big chunk of money. And that does include a lot of people's giving through the church, the faith, and so forth. And to share a little bit of US, 484 billion, there we go. But there is, and it stayed, you know, it grew, but then it's beginning to go flat. And there's some data presented in the US, which is a little bit, see what's happened there, especially because their economy is doing better. And we saw some quite shocking data presented at the AFP in New Orleans about retention levels of donors crashing. And I'm beginning to hear this as well. And it may be a generational thing where now it's getting tight for me. I've still got a mortgage or whatever. I don't think it's been fully analysed. Why is suddenly retention going down again? Again, in the US, who gave where to? Individuals, not as high a percentage as it will be in the rest of the world, I would say. Again, if any of your board members, and it's nearly always a board member or a CEO who's been hired out the corporate sector, say, oh, you should go where the real money is. The corporate sector will really give you everything you need. Anybody had that? I can see a few nodding heads. Just show them a statistic like this. It's the same in the UK. It's the same anywhere. 4%. I've been 40 years in the sector nearly, and it's never been more than 5% in most markets. It is not where the money is. Bequest, legacy giving is going up. Foundation is growing enormously. And the interesting thing about foundations, and I don't know if there's foundation fundraisers here, is the trend in the big foundations, the really big ones. I'm not so sure about the small family, is they're increasingly saying, we will cover overhead, we will cover fundraising costs, which I find amazing. We have one client who received a $50 million unsolicited donation, $50 million, from a certain Canadian woman. And that $50 million it's for AMREF, I mean, it's public information. And she said it's not for the program, it's to build the organization to be far stronger, far more effective, and raise more money. This is a new way, I would say, of philanthropists thinking about how they invest in the non-profit sector, rather than saying, I'd like to fund this building or this program, or I want to help X thousand children. And more the foundations are looking that way. There's about 20 currently of the really big foundations. They even have a funnel, which to be able to be in it, you have to be invited, as we were, which is purely a funnel for the organizations they fund to seek support with fundraising, management consultancy, recruitment, to help them just perform better. And that's all funded by the big foundations. So again, think about foundations, do some research. There are some that will now fund your infrastructural growth, not just your program. And where did the money go? Well, obviously religion's top of the tree in the US. It wouldn't be elsewhere. Another sector, anybody from the arts sector, cultural sector here? How did you do in COVID and post-COVID? No, I agree, and that's pretty true the world over. But I have to say, sadly, the arts organisations, that even some of the very big brands, which you would all know here in the cultural sector, they did no preparation. Their CRMs were dreadful. I tried to donate online to several. I tried to pay online for the shows that were showing, like theatre productions, and the payment system collapsed pretty much every time. I mean, I have the luxury of just picking up a phone and saying, I want a conversation with the fundraising director, and say, you've got to sort your back end, because if it's failing for me, how much other money are you losing? And also, I have to say, the arts sector probably seemed less keen to pivot. Colleague of ours does fundraising through telephone in the Netherlands, and one of their biggest music centres in Amsterdam, super modern place, they telephoned their regular attendees of events. They had a record fundraising year, even though they didn't even put on virtual events. But people wanted to come out of COVID and say, hey, this organisation still exists. I just think there's still a bit of a retail philosophy about we make our money through big corporation sponsorship and ticket sales. Well, no ticket sales. So what are some of the trends? The future belongs to those who prepare for it today. That's a philosophy that could have been written by Baden-Powell, but it wasn't. Malcolm X was a different type of character. Anybody here from Islamic Relief? Anybody look at the published information about Islamic Relief's income last week in the UK? It went up 50 million last year in income. It doubled in the last 2 years in the UK. It's now about, I think, 160 million pound a year organisation. And I happen to be doing some work for the DEC at the moment in the UK with the board and the CEO. And I interviewed Wahid as part of that work, who's the CEO of Islamic Relief. They are so visionary. They are so clear, and they are so flexible as an organisation. And given who I'm interviewing on the DEC, all the CEOs, for example, I was absolutely, totally blown away. And, oh my God, is that... Good Lord, how did that go? I'm going to go very fast. It said an hour, is that correct, in the programme? Oh, okay. Okay, so Islamic philanthropy. There's what UNHCR is doing on that. Talk about the rise of the mega donor, Mackenzie Scott. Check her out. It's very hard. Actually, this is the only website you can kind of find information. Transparency isn't a great thing, but she is giving to very progressive causes, especially women. Who is funding your fundraising? I've argued for many years that the non-profit sector should have a bank. It did get the charity bank. I built investment funds for Greenpeace and others where I was there. The UNICEF is now having its fundraising funded through loans and funding from the World Bank, because they get the business model, they get the difference. They put $1 into, or $100 million into program, put $100 million into fundraising, they get many more bangs for the buck. This has now become ubiquitous, but I still see so few organisations using it as a donation point. Anybody just got a donation thing like that at the front door of your office? Yeah, you have? Buy the coffee machine, very smart. But, again, cultural organisations, I've seen churches do spectacular fundraising with this. Free to visit, maybe, but you can just walk over you with your card. Crowdfunding. Again, came into its own during COVID. It's becoming huge. There is a massive crowdfunding conference that takes place every year in the USA. Facebook fundraising. Anybody do that? Anybody encouraged through their newsletters, their communication, do a Facebook fundraiser? You know what? I do it all the time. What's the organisation again?
Karen Trust.
Okay, thank you. You do it. You promote it.
Yeah, I believe so. I don't work in that area.
Okay. Many organisations, it's money for old rope. There is a downside. You don't get the data of the donors. The upside is you do start creating digital communities who are aware of your brand and they give money. I do it for, we get bodies washed up in the sea in Spain. It's pretty awful. Did it for the Elton John AIDS Foundation this year. It's, you know, it's good money. If they get a few thousand from me, they're going to get a few thousand from other people. The people who seem to be absolutely rocking it in the fundraising sector of donors, people like us, is Medical Aid for Palestine. They seem to raise a huge amount of money through this. Costs you nothing. And it's growing like bonkers as well. Instagram fundraising. Anybody here Instagram fundraising? You're putting your hands up for a lot. Yeah, but again, I'm amazed how little we're using this. And I'm sorry, looking at the average age in the room, we're Facebook people. But people who are younger are Instagram, and people who are younger are TikTok. And all of these, I'm not going to go through them, but all of these are becoming ways of engaging. Okay, it may not be big donations, but it's getting that Generation Z into giving, or Z, sorry for our American friends. It's getting people engaged. It's getting people to give, and that's the first challenge. And, you know, in Spain, there are, you know, Red Cross running sessions on TikTok fundraising in Spain. WhatsApp. Anybody use WhatsApp? Most of you? In Spain, more people use WhatsApp than texting, emailing. It's massive. Spain's one of the biggest. You know, UK's up there, 81% perhaps use it. But people I know, organisations we know are using WhatsApp for major donor fundraising. They're creating WhatsApp groups for people who've been to a programme. They're creating donor advised fund groups and using WhatsApp a way of people communicating within the donation community, and maybe the charity putting stuff in now and again, but creating a sense of community when people don't often get together. And to be honest, it's really not. Actually, in the USA, WhatsApp is not big. People still say, oh, I'll send you a text. I'm going, And when I was in China pre-COVID, they looked at my mobile phone, Chinese, and they go, how pathetic, it's so old-fashioned. You know, WhatsApp, oh God, we have everything much more sophisticated than that. But just think about it, you know, getting people into groups, making sure that you're communicating. And also, WhatsApp is increasingly used by older generations. This is not a young person's thing. So just check it out. There's lots of information on, you know, how to boost your digital storytelling through WhatsApp. Because you can link photos, you can link videos, you can link your YouTube materials. Recycle what you've got within that. Anybody doing streaming channels? Any of these? Netflix? I can tell you, well, we're in conversation with most of these at the moment for an organisation, and there is fundraising already entering into the lower level pay-for service. You know, you've got to take some advertising, so you pay less for your monthly service. There are opportunities. We're looking to see if emergency appeals, for example, for not just the DEC, but all those emergency appeals around the world. And my colleague working on that out in New York, everybody had the conversation. They had no problem having a conversation. Yeah, if it's a collective of, you know, 20 countries and in the Emergency Appeals Alliance worldwide, and the DEC's in there as the biggest, yeah, we're going to hit really good people with messages like Help Ukraine. Doesn't take much. They've got your financial details. You can donate through your account. Not complicated. And I'm sure most of you submit something. I always thought one of the great innovations was actually public created innovation. When the public started renting properties in Ukraine from people who they know could never rent them that property. They could never go and visit it. It was in a war zone. But that had been part of their income source, and then just saying, we'll keep the money. Airbnb, Dutch company, like most of these things, booking.com and all of that, they suddenly had to react because they were looking like taking their commission but not giving anything back. So then Airbnb starts promoting, you know, give to Ukraine through Airbnb, support people that way. This is the messaging that was going out through Airbnb in Spain during that time. And it makes sense, because why does it make so much sense? It's locating mission cause, and you know, you're homeless, you've lost your home, you were going to rent that home. Gaming is just gone bonkers. Anybody working with the gaming industry? Yeah, UNICEF. Yeah, actually, I think I know a little bit about your program. This is massive. Forget, you know, whatever we've done about streaming and all that. Mega money, and growing. And there is some desire, and there's gaming for good and all of that, desire to engage that community. Again, it's often a younger generation. Some of these kids are multi-millionaires from being professional gamers. They are brand influencers. You want a social influencer? Get a gamer. And somehow make sure that your mission connects with their mission. You know, what do they want to do? You know, Call of Duty and First Red Cross, I wouldn't necessarily put them together, would you? You know, UNHCR, probably not, but there's bound to be other stuff going on. Look at this. This is just how much was raised. Streamers on Twitch, 110 million using something called Tiltify. Ever heard of that? There you go. Live stream. This conference is live streaming. Live streaming is becoming big industry, and there is money. There's lots of charity platforms in the US doing live streaming and fundraising. I'm jumping a little. Anybody do Amazon Smile? Rubbish, wasn't it? Absolute pile of crap. And then they cancelled it anyway because they could see it wasn't working. Then they promised to do something else. Anybody seen Amazon doing anything great for fundraising recently? I'm trying to follow it. Nah. Rubbish. Crypto, you know, I'm from Greenpeace. I'm an ex-Greenpeace person, fundraising director. Lots of crypto stuff going on. If you want to destroy the planet, give through crypto. It's not healthy, but many people are in it. Interestingly, a lot of the crypto companies and designers and all that come out of East Europe, and Ukraine is a very high-tech country. It was big for them. Bitcoin, the same. Save the children well in there. NFT, non-fungible tokens. Anybody raising money on that? Yeah, a little bit. I think it's not going to be the future, but it's there. So you either need to know how to address it and say no, which more and more I'm not seeing it as working as a huge opportunity, because probably somebody on your board will know somebody who thinks it's a great idea. So you should at least learn, if nothing else, the environmental challenges of some of this. Didn't work for Ukraine in this case, NFTs for Children of Heroes, which is who I work with. So what's going to come through? Obviously, artificial intelligence, everybody wants to know about that. It can massively help your understanding of your donors. It can massively help, as we've all seen, with bots dealing with simple questions. It's not the same as a human conversation. It can certainly help you throw analysis through your database and identify what you might be looking for and maybe some trends that you might not be looking for. A lot of stuff on behavioral science coming on. Virtual reality, you know, that was the big new toy about 10 years ago, especially in face-to-face. Kind of been and gone, and even I think Apple just launched a new virtual reality thing. I'm not sure it's helping. It might help with certain locations to give people an experiential, one of those things, any experiential, thank you. I need a wordsmith to help me here. You know, it's hard to take people to war zones. It's hard to take people perhaps where there is really challenging environments like the melting of the ice through climate change and so forth. But, yeah, is it really working? Yeah, we're talking about these are the ways in which I think AI can help. We're all actually thinking AI, is it a big challenge? It might do most of us out of a job. I don't think so, actually, because we're in the human conversation and community business. And it's not very good. I've looked up myself, and it's about 10 years old data in AI. Maybe I'm just not interesting enough to update. You all know Ken Burnett. Don't follow trends, make them. And again, I think this links back to the opening plenary. Take some risks, take some challenges. I think one of the worst things about preparing for the future and innovation in the fundraising world is we are very, very risk averse. We are constantly telling, I mean, face to face, it was never going to work. Telephone, I remember when the Americans came and said, the IFC, telephone, you've got to call your donors. And especially the Brits and the Dutch were hiding their heads. Oh, God, that is so intrusive. It's not true. So make trends. Be out there. So the future, pestle. Somebody asked me, what do you do to prepare? How many of you do this pestle analysis on your fundraising? Yes. Good. Quite a few of you. Political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. You look at your work, your organization, and your fundraising using this analysis. What are the technological opportunities and threats? What are the environmental? What is the legal? You know, the data restrictions that came across Europe, which the UK still signs up to, created massive challenges for fundraising. We spent years preparing for it, and I'm still not sure we were fully prepared for it. I think this is get ready for the GZs. You're going to get this presentation. There's a lot of data saying there. They are going to be good philanthropists. We just don't ask them to be philanthropists in the way that we think of philanthropists as boomers or whatever we might be in generationally. But there is more and more research that these people are approached. They're just approached in an old fart way for a young generation way. So what's your GZ strategy or Gen Z strategy? What are some of the trends? We've got political economic uncertainty, we've got government cuts, we've got mergers, we've talked about that. Cyber security, even our Ukraine organisation has been cyber hacked massively from Russia. Maybe the Wagner Group going might help that. Demographics are changing. Biggest challenge, attracting top traffic. Burnout, hear more this afternoon about that. The stats out of the US, the stats out of Europe, UK, they're terrible. We have no fundraiser retention strategy. We have donor retention strategy. We don't have fundraiser retention. We're burning out. There's a lot to be said about that. Look at this. 86% of non-profits in the US have challenges on retention of staff. And I am at my end, which is good because I've only got 2 slides left. Or are these our biggest fundraising challenges or opportunities? Climate emergency. Interestingly, the British public, despite all of those actions, I've just seen the latest research by the DC, they don't care about oil companies. They think they're good guys still. They're still willing to take money for the non-profit sector. Massive famine, you know, caused possibly by Ukraine. These can challenge our fundraising. Obviously, for others, they're opportunities, but they will make a change in where the money moves. Banking collapse. As you know, you have to submit presentations very early. Banking collapses were happening when I wrote this. Is there one imminent in the UK? They say stress test. Let's see. So the future depends on you, on what you do today. Thank you. And please tell me if you have any time for questions.
We do.
Good. 10 minutes, brilliant, thank you. Jonathan here would like to ask a question, I think.
Hello.
Hi, Jonathan.
Is that on? You know you went to school with my uncle, don't you?
Sorry?
You know you went to school with my uncle, don't you?
I think I know I did. You look like
He says hello.
Ken.
No, me? Or
No, him.
no, Chris Smith.
Okay.
Nice
Oh,
common
Chris-
name, isn't it?
Yeah, it is good. Jazz musician now.
He is, yes. And an amateur actor. Anyway, I digress. So I wanted to ask about volunteering. Yeah. So since COVID, the organisations that I've worked with have seen quite a dramatic fall in the number of, especially older people, who have been volunteering for their organisations. So what have you seen outside the UK for organisations that have relied quite heavily on volunteers for either running their organisation or helping with their fundraising or helping organise things?
I think if you go to that CAF data which talks about volunteering, the trend is downwards in the developed economies, and for want of a better phrase, which is probably politically incorrect, and in the emerging economies it's still very strong. But again, the definition of volunteering is much more community-based. And I'm sure if you look at data, and again, somebody in this room might be able to help me out, I'm sure things like food banks and organisations see a growth in volunteering because they see the need and the cause directly. I think I was actually working with the, like I say, American Cancer Society in Portugal. They had a meeting of people from their event from 70 countries. And they were actually experiencing some growth globally, almost any country in volunteering. But then you look through the program, which bizarrely is run by a Brit out of Denia in Spain, their global program, is they really have powerful tools of engagement, motivating, feedback, fun. And on that event, the event, I was assuming it was purely fundraising. the global head of fundraising, American Cancer Society, said, no, actually, one of our core missions now is actually, just by doing the event, is getting into communities where they don't get tested for cancer. Marginal communities, impoverished communities, ethnically diverse communities. And that in itself is bringing more volunteering, because they're suddenly seeing, actually, we're having health impacts on our community by doing a volunteer-led fundraising event. And I think sometimes we kind of take volunteers for granted and don't let them know what a difference they're making. And I think that is something that would be interesting, what community service volunteers, who should, CSV, if you know that, they should be doing work on that. Good question, Jonathan. Say hi to... Yes, civil servant, charity.
Hi, Daryl. Thank you. You showed the slides where you were talking about the level of use in WhatsApp, and particularly Brazil was top of the chart. It was obviously driven by the Brazil government running their COVID-19 response strategy through that with AI generation that led to trust. Are we seeing levels of trust in some of these digital platforms evolving and changing internationally and at different levels? WhatsApp's a very good example of a Meta platform, with different varying degrees of levels of trust in Meta and its underlying architecture. Are there any other countries that are starting to see the same level of trust in things like WhatsApp globally that you're seeing?
I think I've not seen anything that shows there's fear of WhatsApp or distrust in it, other than it's owned by Meta, of course, which anything Facebook buys, anything that Microsoft buys, you need to suddenly think, well, Skype's gone down the shitter, hasn't it? Because it's owned by Microsoft now. I think the thing about things like WhatsApp is you're only communicating to people you've absolutely chosen to communicate to. You've only let them into your world. So I was just at, Love Supreme Jazz Festival down in Brighton, which was fabulous, or Klein technically. And, you get to a festival, the group of friends, you create a WhatsApp group, you're meant to communicate, oh, I'm over here, have you checked out that? And of course, the signal doesn't work, so it's a total waste of time. But generally speaking, those kind of groups, whether it's your friends, whether it's your business WhatsApp group. I don't know what happens in Spain, in the UK. In Spain, many communities use WhatsApp as their neighbour watch schemes. So much so that WhatsApp themselves in Spain print up this neighbourhood has a WhatsApp neighbourhood watch scheme, and neighbours say and it's real, it's immediate, and they say, oh, somebody climbing through your window there and pulling the bars open, they're probably robbing you, But at least while you're doing your shopping, you know that. But I think Facebook, for example, has been ridiculously devalued. And as an owner of digital agency of fundraising in 3 countries, there are some big challenges of trust, and also big challenges of anybody in Facebook will see they're getting way more marketing stuff hitting them now than they did before. And I think one of the challenges with trust in all the digital stuff is the cookie message that keeps coming back, and if you try to scroll through and say only functional, you'd spend half your day doing it, so you go to hell with it, and then you get... So I think there's some digital challenges on the way, and the other digital challenge, by the way, is your iPhone then blocking certain types of fundraising messages. So digital is a huge opportunity. Like most fundraising, it's first mover benefit, I would say, till that becomes too low ROI, and then you move to whatever is there first. That was always Greenpeace's advantage. We were pretty much first mover in everything digital, certainly. 93, we were making $50,000 a month online. 93. You didn't have an email because they didn't exist in the public domain.